Greetings. My name is Dr. Sebastian Mahfood, Associate Professor of Intercultural Studies at Kendrick Glennon Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome to a short presentation entitled Love and Responsibility, the Personalization Principle in Cyberspace. This is part 2 of 4, The Culture of Use. In Love and Responsibility, published almost 2 decades before Theology of the Body began making its debut in John Paul II's Wednesday conferences, Kara defined the 2 meanings of the word use, predicated upon the principle that the only proper way to respond to another human person is through love. In a revision of Immanuel Kant's moral imperative, Wattia writes that whenever a person is the object of your activity, remember that you may not treat that person as only the means to an end, as an instrument, but must allow for the fact that he or she too has, or at least should have, distinct personal ends. This principle lies at the basis of all the human freedoms, properly understood, and especially freedom of conscience. A human person, he emphasizes, cannot be a tool or an object acted upon entirely for another's selfish benefit. For use, in such a way, is antithetical to love. Wattia's 2 definitions are significant because he is speaking in terms of sexual relationships. Applying these definitions to cyberspace, we might legitimately argue that the artifacts we find online are not the same as the human person who posts them, but they are extensions of the human person, representing that person in cyberspace. We might also legitimately argue that publication of any images, not just those of the body, presupposes permission for use by others, that by virtue of one's extending him or herself into the public realm, he or she is transformed from a subject to an object. To argue such, though, would be to argue for the objectification of the human person through his extensions, and that is something we would do better to avoid. The personalization of that which we find in cyberspace affects our entire view of how online interactions should be conducted. Of these online interactions, 2 kinds exist, the asynchronous and the synchronous. Respectively, those in which we encounter artifacts of others, such as text postings, images, audios, or videos, otherwise known as asynchronous interaction, and those in which we encounter the real-time presence of others interacting with us, such as textual, audio, or video chats, otherwise known as synchronous interaction. The fact that the first type is often not personalized leads ironically to the second type's depersonalization. For when we come to think of a posted video as an object without a human person behind it, the objectification of a person engaging in live video chat is not far behind. Virtual interactions have real consequences, but it is not the consequences alone that determine the good or evil of our actions. Rather, our morality as Catholics involves, of course, an intimacy in relations among our intentions, the object of our focus, and the circumstances. All 3 of these sources of morality have to be good for the activity itself to be good. And if the good is present in only 1 or 2 of them, then the activity itself is not good. Before we even reach the consequences, then, the good inherent within any given act is already measurable by the goodness present in each of the 3 fonts. Our personalization of our virtual encounters, as a result, provides the key we need to discern whether what we do online is morally licit. When we enter cyberspace, we usually do so with our own ends in mind, and we use the computer as a means to accomplishing those ends, either to be productive in some act or some interaction, or to enrich ourselves or others in some form of study or entertainment. In the first case, productivity is never an end in and of itself, but the pursuit of an end beyond itself that addresses the question of what for. In the second case, enrichment is considered its own end, and our occupying ourselves for a time in a pleasurable activity. Such pursuits in media that facilitate the pleasurable stimulation of our senses can end in the brief satisfaction of the appetite, but may foster an addiction to instant gratification that is intrinsically unhealthy. Far from being a Hobbesian or even utilitarian view of the pleasure principle, Wattia's explanation that pleasure can be treated as a distinct aim of a human person establishes the necessity for a personalistic approach to, which is to say a personalization of, online interactions. Our accomplishing our ends via cyberspace, then, requires as much an examination of our intentions, the object of our pursuit, and the circumstances within which we pursue it, as does the effort to accomplish our ends in face-to-face communities. In fact, it requires more of an examination, since it does not come naturally to us to see everything in cyberspace as an extension of a particular human person, and realize that real individuals with eternal destinies like ours are behind them. A special note on this collection of images. While I hunted through common areas for the images I used in Part 1 to model the process of seeking permissions, I went directly to a stock photo database for most of these images I used here in Part 2. My reason for doing so was that it streamlined my search. For as little as 19 cents per image, depending upon the level of quality and resolution I needed, I was able to populate this PowerPoint in 1/10 of the time it took me to populate the first one. One image to note is the one I entitled Immorality Online, which I took from the pre-sample section at the cost only of my having 123rf.com's watermark across the center of the image. That's all for Part 2 of this presentation. I look forward to having you back in Part 3. In the meantime, God bless and goodbye.